Year 1893, a 12-year-old child in Germany loses his parents forever. Before leaving, his parents leave behind some money for him. But in the future, while traveling, that money is stolen. Even after losing everything, he had one thing left: his unstoppable passion for watches. And through this passion, he created the world's most prestigious watch company. This is the story of Rolex watches. In Germany, 12-year-old Hans Wilsdorf became an orphan after the death of his parents. His future seemed completely uncertain. His relatives sold off his parents' business and sent him to a boarding school. There, he became friends with a boy from Switzerland. This boy told him about the Swiss watchmaking industry. Hans realized his future lay in that industry. So in 1900, at the age of 19, Hans left Germany and went to Switzerland. There, he got a job at a watchmaking firm named Kuno Korten. His role was to test the accuracy of hundreds of pocket watches daily. Through this work, his passion for making precise watches kept growing. In 1903, he moved to London. But on this journey, he suffered a major setback. All 33,000 German gold marks left by his parents were stolen. This was a huge loss for him. But he had no option other than to move forward. In London, he started working in a watchmaking company in sales and marketing. In the next 2 years, he learned a great deal about manufacturing, sales, and most importantly, consumer behavior. He realized that most watchmakers were focused on fancy, decorative designs. But what customers actually wanted were simple, durable, accurate, and elegant watches. To solve this problem, at the age of 24, he decided to start his own watch company. But he didn't have enough capital, so he partnered with his brother-in-law instead of seeking investment. And in 1905, they founded Wilsdorf and Davis. Their first product targeted travelers. He realized travelers needed to keep track of time to catch trains or buses. So he designed a smaller-than-usual pocket watch for easy portability. He packed it in a high-quality leather pouch to make it look premium and durable. He named it the Portfolio Pocket Watch. And it was a decent success. Even though he started with pocket watches, Hans had a different vision. He believed wristwatches would soon replace pocket watches entirely. So he shifted his focus to making world-class wristwatches. But there was a problem. People weren't ready to accept wristwatches. At the time, wristwatches were seen as feminine, but Hans wanted to change this perception. In 1906, he noticed that men and women in Britain loved wearing bracelets, and that's where he saw a big opportunity. He introduced gold and silver wristwatches that looked like bracelets. Instead of calling them wristwatches, he marketed them as bracelet watches. Thanks to this branding, the watches became popular across Britain. At the time, most watches had only the maker's name on them. But Hans wanted his watches to have their own unique brand, a name that would fit neatly on the watch face and be easy to pronounce in any language. He created over 100 name combinations from various letters. Eventually, he came up with a name that sounded smooth and catchy: Rolex. In 1908, he officially trademarked it. Even today, wristwatches are not just for checking time. They enhance your personality and overall look. Rolex sales were rising, but accuracy was still a challenge. Wristwatch movements were too small, and no one had yet perfected them. Until 1910, Hans imported movements from Switzerland. But now he decided to make his own. He immersed himself in horology. He met watch experts across the globe, and soon became a movement expert himself. He developed his first wristwatch movement, the 15-line caliber 200. He sent it to the Swiss Chronometer Testing Institute. After rigorous testing, it became the first wristwatch to receive a chronometer certificate. Hans had created the most accurate wristwatch of its time. This innovation greatly boosted Rolex's reputation. Now, Rolex watches were sold beyond Britain, in all of Europe. By 1914, Hans had opened multiple Wilsdorf and Davis offices in Britain. He had built a team of over 60 top professionals. The business was thriving. Then World War I broke out. To fund the war, Britain imposed a 33% export duty on watches. This made Rolex 33% more expensive than its foreign competitors. Sales crashed. To survive, Hans moved the entire business to Switzerland. Until now, Rolex was only the brand name. But in Switzerland, he renamed the company to Rolex Watch Company and restarted many operations from scratch. The war had collapsed the luxury watch market. But Hans noticed an interesting trend. Soldiers in World War I were demanding wristwatches. Time coordination in battle was critical. Pocket watches weren't practical during combat. Soldiers had to drop their rifles and dig into their coats just to check the time. So armies started shifting to wristwatches. Rolex launched trench watches for soldiers. They had unbreakable glass, a sturdy body, and luminous radium hands to see time in low light. These watches helped Rolex maintain good sales during the war. World War I soldiers were seen as heroes, and when the public saw their heroes wearing wristwatches, they followed suit. Just as Hans predicted, wristwatches replaced pocket watches completely. But there was still one problem. Dust and water could get inside and ruin wristwatch accuracy. Hans wanted to solve this. He decided to make a tightly sealed watch case, so tight that nothing, not even water, could enter. He found that most watches used a snap-on assembly, like a tiffin box. This left small gaps for dust and moisture to seep in. So Rolex introduced a screw-down case. Grooves were built into the parts, which were screwed tightly together. Rubber gaskets were added at critical points, and the crown sealed the watch like a submarine hatch. This watch could stay underwater with no damage, just like an oyster. He named it the Rolex Oyster. Launched in 1926, it was revolutionary, and it needed equally revolutionary marketing. Hans learned about a swimmer named Mercedes Gleitze. She claimed to be the first woman to swim across the English Channel. Many doubted her, so she decided to swim it again in front of the media. Hans reached out and made her Rolex's first brand ambassador. She wore the Rolex Oyster on a necklace during her swim. After nearly 10 hours, she covered 80% of the distance before exhaustion forced her to stop. The attempt failed. But when the Oyster was checked, it was still working perfectly. Mercedes Gleitze became famous for her determination, and Rolex gained fame for its waterproof watch. Hans featured both in his ads. He also displayed the Oyster inside fish tanks at Rolex stores with live fish inside. In 1928, actress Evelyn Leigh became the next brand ambassador. In the ads, she dipped her hand, wearing a Rolex, into a fish tank. This bold marketing boosted the Rolex Oyster's reputation. While the world praised Rolex and Hans, he wasn't done. Back then, watches were fully mechanical. They had no batteries, only a main spring that powered the watch. You had to wind the crown every 2 days. And in waterproof watches, improper winding risked water leakage. So Hans set out to make a fully automatic watch. Years of trial and error followed. Finally, he invented the perpetual rotor, a semicircular rotor that spun 360 degrees with wrist movement. This motion tightened the mainspring automatically. The watch could run forever, perpetually. He called it the Rolex Oyster Perpetual. Others had tried similar designs before, but Rolex was the first to make it reliable and successful. The Perpetual made Rolex and Hans a legend in horology. But in 1939, another crisis hit. World War II. The global supply chain collapsed, and Rolex sales plummeted. Over the next several years, Hans fought to keep Rolex alive. Then in 1944, another tragedy struck. His wife passed away. The last 6 years had been the hardest in Hans Wilsdorf's life. But since childhood, he had faced challenges, and he had developed the mindset of a fighter. In 1945, Rolex completed 40 years. Hans wanted to launch a special model to celebrate the occasion, but it had to be more than just another watch. He wanted it to reflect Rolex's journey and values. He combined all his best inventions into one timepiece: the Oyster case, the perpetual rotor, and a new addition, a date window. At midnight, the date would change automatically, and he named this model Rolex Datejust. It was a symbol of Rolex's heritage and precision. The next year, Hans did something legendary. He created the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation and transferred 100% of Rolex's shares to it, which meant he no longer personally owned Rolex. He turned it into a non-profit trust. Why? Because Hans had no children, and he didn't want Rolex to fall into the wrong hands after him. So he built a structure that would keep Rolex independent forever, and made sure all profits went back into R&D and employee welfare. This one decision protected Rolex for generations to come. Hans spent the rest of his life innovating quietly. Under his leadership, Rolex became known as the most reliable watchmaker in the world. In 1960, at the age of 79, Hans passed away peacefully. He had turned an orphan's dream into a timeless global legacy. Even after his death, Rolex didn't slow down. The foundation followed his vision strictly, investing profits into innovation. In 1967, Rolex made the first waterproof watch that worked at 610 meters under the sea. In 1992, they launched the Yachtmaster, and in 2000, the Daytona became one of the world's most sought-after watches. Even today, Rolex still follows Hans Wilsdorf's principles: focus on quality over quantity. No paid brand ambassadors, no aggressive marketing. And 100% of profits are reinvested. That's why Rolex watches are considered not just timepieces, but status symbols of timeless success.